This is an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the nation. Men and women in Iowa develop cancer at rates about 10% higher than the rest of the country. Iowa is one of only 2 states where the cancer rates are rising. Young Iowans are not being spared. The cancer rate for Iowans ages 20 to 49 has increased sharply over the past decade. Today, we will take a look at those trends and try to understand them. And I'll also talk with 2 young cancer survivors. With me now is Mary Charlton. She is director of the Iowa Cancer Registry and professor of epidemiology at the University of Iowa. She's here to help us understand what the data is telling us. Hello, Mary.
Hi, Charity. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And I want to start by saying, I'm pulling numbers to try to give an idea of what's happening. But when you come up with numbers that describe this trend, it only shows us a small part of this picture. This is a really complicated picture.
That's correct. Yep. We see different trends in different age groups, there's different benchmarks, there's different causes. So it's a really, where people kind of want it to be a simple discussion, it quickly turns into a very nuanced discussion.
And you have been on Iowa Public Radio in the recent past to talk about what we have seen in this year's cancer report and the rates overall and survivorship rates overall. I do want to focus today on increasing cancer rates in these younger Iowans, ages 20 to 49. So tell me how we have seen that rate change over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, well, if you go kind of all the way back to 2000, kind of turn of the century, like they did in the Washington Post article, we see that the rates have increased about 22% in that 20 to 49-year age group from 2000 to 2022.
That seems very significant.
Mm-hmm.
Can you put that in context for me? I mean, is that an unprecedented rise?
Yeah, so a couple of things. It's 22% here in Iowa that it's gone up. It's also going up in the U.S., but at a rate of about 10% from 2000 to 2022. If you compare it to the 50-plus age group, the group we traditionally think about getting cancer, that rate has only increased about 1% to 2% from 2000 to 2022. However, in the rest of the country, that rate has dropped 14%. So that's what really sets Iowa apart from the rest of the country, is they're declining while we're still sort of inching upward.
Right. And you mentioned the Washington Post article, which is about cancer rates among young people, not just in Iowa, but they singled out the 6 highest corn-producing states. So it's really the Corn Belt, the Midwestern region. And they said in those states, the cancer rate for young adults, and they used the age range 15 to 49, is about 5% higher than the rest of the nation. Is Iowa an outlier even within that?
Correct. Yeah, we have generally the highest cancer rates in that grouping of Midwestern states, significantly higher than Illinois or Missouri, and nearly significantly higher than Nebraska and Minnesota. So yes, fortunately in Iowa's population are less than 20-year-olds. So our pediatric population, our teenage population, 15 to 19, we do not have higher rates than the rest of the country.
Okay.
Things kind of start to change in that 20 to 29, and then it gets bigger in the 30 to 39, and then even bigger in the 40 to 49.
This hour, I'm talking to 2 survivors of cervical cancer. That's not a representative selection of this group of Iowans who seems to be at higher risk for cancer. What kinds of cancer are we seeing in this age group?
Yeah, in the 20 to 49, the most common cancers we see are breast, melanoma, thyroid, colorectal, and testicular cancers.
We also see quite a bit of skin cancer in that age group as well.
Yeah, that would be the melanoma, that's the only skin cancer we track, just because basal and squamous cell cancers are so common, and they thankfully don't cause a lot of mortality, so we don't track those.
So you can look at this trend over time. And as you said, going back to 2000, we are seeing this increase really starting in maybe 2013. Things really start going up. What does that tell us about now? Because we have this high rate right now, but the factors that lead to cancer, our exposure or whatever is happening, that could have happened any time in a person's lifetime. what do we know about having this rate right now?
Yeah, that's the really complicated part of this. People look at the trends and they say, well, what happened in 2013? Why do we start deviating so much from the rest of the country? And that's not, unfortunately, the question to ask in cancer is what happened in 2013. It's, these cancers take sometimes decades to develop. So it might be what happened in 2003, what happened in the 90s. We did try to look back at the data, like did something in the data or the way we capture these cancers change around 2013? Did the screening things change in 2013? Were there anything that could make it change quickly? And we really couldn't find an explanation.
And people want to know. I mean, of course we want to know. And people do tend to jump to conclusions as well. I mean, we know that Iowa has a water quality problem. We know that the levels of nitrates in our water are high. We know that being in an agricultural state, we are exposed to pesticides and herbicides at a higher rate than people who are not living in an agricultural state. So people definitely want to connect these dots. Why can't we?
Yeah, and it's understandable. But again, like we talked about, cancer develops over decades. The second thing is no one thing ever causes cancer. We all know people who smoked their entire lives and never got lung cancer, and people who never smoked and still got lung cancer, because it's this complicated array of genetic, environmental, lifestyle risk factors all working together. So you can imagine two people drinking from the same contaminated water source, and one person doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, gets a lot of sleep, gets a lot of exercise, eats fruits and vegetables that can repair DNA damage. The other person drinking from that same water source, heavy smoker, heavy drinker, doesn't, not exercising, not eating fruits and vegetables, they may process that exposure in a very different way. So in Iowa, we don't see entire towns getting cancer or, certain water sources causing these clusters or hotspots. We just don't see it. We also see very different patterns for each type of cancer, there's a different geographic pattern. So it just doesn't lead one to believe that there could be one thing causing all the cancer in Iowa.
We do see groupings of people having cancer. In that Washington Post article, again, that we mentioned earlier, they wrote about several young adults who had lived in the Winterset area, who had apparently coincidentally developed different kinds of cancer in their 20s. What makes a group a cluster?
Right. So we actually looked into that area to see, do they have a higher proportion of cancer in that 20 to 49 age group? And they do not. However, people move, so people who may have gone to that high school and lived in that area may live all across the country now. And so if they get cancer, we don't capture them at the Iowa Cancer Registry. So it makes it really difficult to detect clusters of people who move around over time. So that's one hard part of being able to say definitively, do we or do we not have a cluster?
So I know that you know how frustrated Iowans are. We see these rates and it is so frustrating and it is so scary, and we don't have control over what's going on in our environment. Are we going to be able to understand this? Are we going to be able to figure out where all this cancer is coming from?
That's a great question. We do make our data available at the Iowa Cancer Registry to researchers who are looking at exposures. And just one study I want to point out is the agricultural health study run out of the National Cancer Institute, where they enrolled over 30,000 pesticide applicators, almost all farmers from Iowa back in the 90s. And they're following them through decades. And they're asking them about all their lifestyle behaviors. They're taking cheek cells and blood cells and looking at their genetics and those types of things so they can really isolate the impact of pesticides. They're just launching new studies of nitrates now that they have a good way of estimating nitrate exposure in Iowa wells. So I think we will know more as studies come out, but it's just a really hard thing to disentangle.
Federal funding has shifted dramatically over the last year. Are some of these studies, is some of your work in danger because of that?
As of now, no, thankfully. But like I said, studies like the agricultural health study are run out of the National Cancer Institute, which had a huge loss in their staffing. So it could definitely slow things down. Hopefully, Iowans continue to advocate for funding for that, because that study in particular is going to give us some really important answers.
Another thing that we do know is that survivorship is up. And I'm going to be talking to two survivors. And The first survivor that I'm going to talk to in just a moment, Emily Hoffman, has survived her cancer. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer at the age of 30 and she is cancer-free, but because of side effects of treatment, her life has been radically changed. She can no longer eat. She has to depend on, nutrition that comes into her body through a tube. She basically lost her 30s to trying to figure out what had happened to her body and how to cope with it. It feels like there's an important conversation to be had about what survivorship means and what the cost of cancer really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one thing, when we talk about how Iowa has such a high cancer incidence rate, but we have a relatively average mortality rate that's declining. And also we see a lot of our cancers are driven by these early stage, very treatable cancers, which is great. So sometimes people say, well, what's the big deal? So what if we are catching all these cancers early? People are having good outcomes and we don't have a very high mortality rate. I would say the big deal is we have, thousands of people going through cancer and the treatments for cancer, which can have profound side effects like you're going to talk about with Emily. It's just incredible what people go through. They always have to worry about their cancer coming back. It's just a really devastating diagnosis. And so anything we can do to prevent those cancers from happening is incredibly important.
So the physical toll, the mental toll as well. You did mention earlier that obviously the choices that we make, cancer is nobody's fault. I want to make that clear.
That's right.
But the choices that we do make can decrease our risk for cancer and improve our risk for survival.
Yeah, absolutely. But I appreciate that point, and I want to reiterate that one thing that we really could do better as a state is to have policies that make it easier to do the healthier things and harder to do the unhealthy things, and really support people in making healthier choices. In leaving it to the individual, that's what's gotten us to where we are today.
Mary Charlton, thank you so much. Mary Charlton is director of the Iowa Cancer Registry and professor of epidemiology at the University of Iowa. This hour, we are focusing on the increasing rates for cancer among young Iowans ages 20 to 49. This is Talk of Iowa from IPR News. This is an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the nation. Men and women in Iowa develop cancer at rates about 10% higher than the rest of the country. Today, we're focusing on cancer among young adults, those ages 15 to 49. According to the Washington Post, the cancer rate for young adults has been climbing over the past decade in the 6 leading states for corn production. That's Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois, Minnesota, Indiana, and Kansas. Those 6 states have a rate about 5% higher than the rest of the country for young adults. And for every case that makes up these statistics, there's a real human being. And I'm going to talk now with 2 young cancer survivors. Both of our guests are women who have survived cervical cancer, but there are many other men and women in Iowa with different kinds of cancers and different experiences. I'll talk with Athena Porter in just a few minutes. With me now is Emily Hoffman of West Des Moines. She was 30 years old when she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She is now 42. She now works as a cancer registrar and has helped to launch a program for young survivors at Above and Beyond Cancer. Hello, Emily.
Hello, Charity.
Thank you for sharing this with us. I want to go back to, I'm sure, what was a very frightening time when you were 30 years old. How were you diagnosed?
I honestly, I had no symptoms. And so my diagnosis came out of the blue. Really, life up until age 30, I had been healthy. And so the only time I went to the doctor was for my annual physical. So in 2013, I was going to my PCP for my annual physical and didn't expect anything to come of it. I was asymptomatic, and so I just remember in the middle of my exam, my PCP saying, "Oh, your cervix looks different this year," and just not really. I mean, I did not understand the severity of that statement. At the time, it was just kind of like, "Oh, okay, that's nice." And she sent me on to a gynecologist who 2 days later did another exam and called me the next day to say that I had cancer. And she was sending me on to an oncologist. And I just didn't really believe it because, again, I had no symptoms. I felt fine. And
you were 30 years old.
Yeah, and I was 30 and had been healthy. So I went to the oncologist 2 days later, and he told me did another exam, and he told me I had cancer. And that's when I believed it, and the whirlwind of treatment started. For me, treatment was chemo and radiation, and I actually got through that pretty well. For me, I have had a lot of side effects from my treatment.
Before we talk about that, because your treatment journey is long and difficult, you mentioned you were healthy. You weren't just healthy. I mean, you were athletic, you were active, you wanted to have a job where you worked outside. I mean, in so many ways, it sounds like you were the picture of health.
Yeah, I was. I was active outdoors. I had been in my full-time career out of college 6 years at that point, which was a pretty physically active job, working in field research. So I was in a cornfield from planting to harvest. Again, no symptoms. And then since cancer, life has been the exact opposite. I like to say those first 30 years were pretty easy, and these next 30 have been extremely difficult because now I'm still active outdoors. It's just in a much more limited capacity, thanks to cancer. And I changed careers just because I could not physically keep up anymore and needed more of a indoor job. So yes, cancer changes your life in a lot more ways than just undergoing treatment.
When you got your diagnosis, so we know it was cervical cancer. Often we hear diagnoses with stage 1, stage 2, et cetera. Do you have details for what stage of cancer they believed you were in?
I was staged as stage 2B, which means it had spread a little out into the tissue, a little outside of my cervix, but not that far, like no lymph nodes, no distant mets anywhere. So at least it was localized.
And when they gave you your prognosis, they said chemotherapy and radiation, but what was the outlook originally? What did you think that would be like?
I had no idea. When you're told you have cancer and the doctor's just talking in that office, it just felt like a whirlwind and all this information's being thrown at you and you're just in your head going, what? I have cancer? Like I couldn't get past that in my head. And I've heard that from a lot of other survivors. So it's comforting to know, that's really how it feels. And then it's just, at least for cervical cancer, the treatment's pretty standard. And so it was pretty straightforward that chemo and radiation is what I needed. And it was just, okay, put my head down and listen to the doctor and do it, because I had no comparison. I knew nobody else with cancer at that time or even before my diagnosis. So it was just, I'm going to do what the doctor says, and it's because this is standard of care and it's successful, and it was. My cancer went away, but as I like to say, but yes, the cancer was cured, but at what cost?
And what was the cost for you? What happened to your body?
So about 3 months after treatment ended, I felt fine up until then, but about 3 months later, I was having trouble eating. Everything I ate, I was throwing up. And if I wasn't throwing it up, it was going through me with these intense cramps in my small intestine. Because basically, essentially, I have radiation damage to a part of my large intestine and my small intestine. And so those areas just don't function. And then when food gets to them, it's like food just kind of gets stuck. And my intestines are just squeezing really hard, trying to push food through, and nothing's happening, and it's just causing these intense cramps. And they literally were like clockwork. Like once they started, they would last for 12 hours straight. And like I'm throwing up, plus I'm in so much pain. Like, so I would be in bed that entire 12 hours. And that would happen every time I ate. So obviously then I'm not eating as much. I spent the next 4 years like that. I literally was pretty much sick in bed. I missed a lot of work. I wasn't eating very much or able to keep food down. And so obviously I was losing a lot of weight and just spent a lot of time bouncing around locally to different doctors, and nobody had treated radiation damage to intestines. So, and it's not really like treatable. It's more like just manage the symptoms, but nobody had any solutions to do that. So then I finally got to Mayo after 4 years, and we tried some different things for another 4 years that would help short term, but nothing long term. For example, like hyperbaric oxygen treatment or therapy. I did that a couple times, and that would help short term. And essentially, I just kept losing weight. It was getting, more and more malnourished. And so at 8 years of that, I finally got to my lowest point in 2022. Weight-wise and nutrition-wise. And so last resort for that was TPN. So we started that, and I'm coming up on 5 years on TPN. So what is that? It is total parenteral nutrition. And that means I get all of my nutrition and hydration through a feeding tube in my chest. So my nutrition is all through a vein and goes straight into my bloodstream, so I can bypass my digestive system. So what does that look like? It's for an IV bag of formula and a pump that go into a backpack, and I am connected to that 12 hours a day. So I run that overnight, but obviously there's a little overlap into my awake hours. It's a lot of work. That's how I describe TPN. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it because I've gained back 20 pounds. I now have proper nutrition. I maintain my weight. I'm not throwing up, and I'm not sick because I'm not having to digest food anymore. I can work. I'm upright. I'm functioning. So it's been life-changing, but again, at a cost.
Yeah. Does it feel like in many ways you've gotten your life back because of this nutrition system?
Yes and no. Yes, for sure, because I can be active more and do just, be social and be out with my friends and not being sick in bed all the time. So that's nice. But on the other hand, TPN is very restricting. Again, since I have this feeding tube, it's essentially kind of like a port in my chest, no swimming, no things in water, right? But also it just makes traveling hard. My formula, needs to stay refrigerated, and it's only good for a few days. So I'm limited, and I've got all these supplies, and it needs to be the process, that I do twice a day kind of needs to be in a somewhat sterile environment. So traveling is very challenging. And yeah, and you're always revolving around a clock with the whole 12-hour thing. I've always got to be mindful of when I need to be getting connected to TPN or when I need to be disconnecting from it. So it's a lot of work.
I'm talking with Emily Hoffman of West Des Moines. She was 30 years old when she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She is now 42 years old. And Emily, during all these years of terrible, terrible sickness, the inability to eat as most people do, what did that do to your psyche? How did you get through that?
Sometimes really do do some reflection, even currently today, that I'm like, wow, I can't believe I've gotten as far as I have in these last 12 years, or I can't believe I've gone through all that, or I am sometimes surprised at my own, I don't know, inner strength to just deal with it, because I think a lot of times I just feel like I've never gotten fully discouraged, even when I was at my lowest with weight and feeling sick, but and not being able to eat that pizza. But on the other hand, that pizza would make me so sick, so it's not even worth it anymore. That so I feel like I've never let myself get fully discouraged by it, but it's not to say that those thoughts don't creep in sometimes. But I do think I've got this inner strength that I did not realize that I had, to just kind of persevere through it. This is the situation. It means I can't eat pizza and mashed potatoes, and I can list a million foods that I would love to eat that I don't anymore, but it is what it is. And so I just don't wallow and think about the things I miss, because I think that would send me a little bit down that spiral, and I just don't want to. I don't want to think about how much I've lost, I guess. I just don't want to think about that.
You have dramatically changed your life. Cancer dramatically changed your life. You changed your career, and you've been through a couple jobs, but you now work as a cancer registrar, and I'm sure you've learned so much about cancer during the last 12 years. When you reflect on some of the things that I was mentioning earlier about how the cancer rate among young adults in Iowa, in this part of the country, has been rising, particularly in the last decade, what does that make you think?
Well, as a young adult cancer survivor, it's super discouraging, because my cancer journey has not been easy. And so, and I did not ever want to really share my story, even after going through all of my side effects and things. But I do, because my journey has been so hard, and I don't want other young adults to go through what I've gone through. This has been really hard. And I sometimes think and I'm single and have family support and things. So for someone who doesn't have support, or someone who's got a husband and kids or a spouse and kids, how much harder it could even be. So I just, the young adult age is there's so much going on in your life at that time that I just don't, I don't want anyone else to go through what I've gone through. And so to know that these rates aren't getting better is very discouraging.
You were only 30 when you got diagnosed. You went through this treatment. You followed the directions of your doctors. In those waiting rooms, I can only imagine that looking around, you did not see people who looked like you. Did you feel like you were the only person who was going through this that was 30, that had your experience?
That's exactly right. I remember sitting in the radiation waiting room every day, and I was the youngest person in there at age 30, and everyone was my parents' age or my grandparents' age, and I just felt like, am I the youngest person here? Why am I the youngest person here? And I don't feel connected at all to anybody else sitting in this room. It was a very lonely and isolating feeling.
Where did you turn for support?
Honestly, I was alone and very lonely for about 2 years after treatment ended. I didn't know any other young adult survivors or just any cancer survivors for 2 years. It wasn't until 2015 that I found a national young adult cancer organization called Stupid Cancer. I found them online, and they were having a annual conference in Colorado, and so I just went by myself, and that's how desperate I was to just connect with other young adult survivors. And I went, and that was life-changing, because I felt like I belonged. I fit in. Everybody understood me. I didn't have to explain my side effects. People just got it, and so I really realized the value of knowing other young adult cancer survivors. And I think that I came back from that and I was like, okay, there's got to be other young adult survivors here locally in Des Moines. So where are they?
And we're going to have to take a short break. We'll be back in just a moment and we'll find out how you found those people. Emily Hoffman of West Des Moines, she was 30 years old when she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She is now 42 years old, and she has helped to launch a program for young survivors at Above and Beyond Cancer. More in a moment. This is Talk of Iowa. This is an archive edition of Talk of Iowa from IPR News. I'm Charity Nebbe. This hour, we've been talking about cancer rates in Iowa and the fact that cancer among young adults, those ages 15 to 49, has been climbing in Iowa and surrounding states, particularly over the last 10 years. And I'm talking with two cancer survivors this hour about their personal experiences. Coming up in just a couple of minutes, I'll talk with Athena Porter. With me now is Emily Hoffman of West Des Moines. She was 30 years old when she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She is now 42 years old, and her life was dramatically changed by cancer and the outcome of her cancer treatment. She lost the ability to eat and now needs to be fed through a tube every day, 12 hours a day. And she has also helped to launch a program for young survivors at Above and Beyond Cancer. And Emily, just before the break, you were talking about going to the Stupid Cancer Conference. And that was really the first time you were in an environment with other young cancer survivors. When you got back, you decided that you wanted to connect with cancer survivors in Iowa. That's what led to founding this program, Young Survivors at Above and Beyond Cancer. Tell me about this program.
Yeah. So I came back from that conference and I decided, all right, I'm going to start volunteering with local cancer organizations. And until I find, kind of my community or the organization that I fit in with. And so I volunteered with Children's Cancer Connection, and I became a member of Iowa Cancer Consortium and American Cancer Society here locally, and then Above and Beyond Cancer I found in 2016. And I went to a few events of theirs, and same thing, just like the radiation waiting room. I felt like all the attendees at these Above and Beyond Cancer events seemed older than me. Good people, but again, I'm still kind of craving that young adult connection. And so in 2017, actually, is when I met a fellow local cervical cancer survivor, Morgan Newman, and we started attending a few Above and Beyond Cancer events together. And again, she noticed the same thing. Everyone was a little older than us. So it was kind of us just talking and thinking, well, I wonder if we could have a YA kind of subgroup within Above and Beyond Cancer. Both Morgan and I know Mary Van Hoekelum at Above and Beyond Cancer very well. So we reached out to her and met her for coffee in 2019 and proposed this idea of a YA program. And she embraced it, and we thought we'd try out try out a few events. Subset of Above and Beyond Cancer. The goal of the program really is just being a community for cancer survivors ages 18 to 40. We've done a variety of activities. Like we had a little hike and sip where we, got coffee and then went on a little wooded hike. We've done a bike ride and brew where we stop at some breweries, in downtown Des Moines, and on a bike ride. We do a little social at Jasper Winery in the summer during the free band evenings. We do a few art classes in the spring and fall. We had a dance class. And our last event for 2025 in December is going to be pickleball at Smash Park in West Des Moines.
What does it mean to you to have this community now?
Oh, gosh. I love not having to, explain my digestive issues to people. Like at these events, we usually have some free food or snacks, and maybe I'm not snacking on everything, but it's a lot easier to explain to this group. Oh, I've got side effects, and like they just get it, So I love that when I'm there, people understand me. Sometimes it's hard to get out and or with our busy lives, and you think, oh, I've got this to go to tonight. But every time I do, I'm like, oh, I'm glad I did that, because, just kind of you feel connected to others and you feel uplifted. So that's what I enjoy with these events.
Emily, thank you so much for talking with me.
Thank you, Charity.
Emily Hoffman. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer when she was 30 years old and helped to launch a program for young survivors at Above and Beyond Cancer. This hour, we're talking about climbing rates of cancer among young Iowans ages 15 to 49. Athena Porter is another young cancer survivor. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer when she was 32 years old in 2023. She lives in Leon, near the southern border of Iowa, and has 2 young kids, and she is with me now. Hello, Athena.
Hello, Charity.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I want to go back to when you were 32 years old. You already had 2 kids. Were you experiencing any symptoms that led to a checkup?
Well, first, I'd like to say thank you for the opportunity to share my story. I definitely enjoy the opportunity to be able to spread awareness, and I'm excited to be here. So to jump into my story, I had no symptoms, no physical symptoms at the time for several years before I even had my 2 beautiful baby girls. I had abnormal pap smears, so pap tests that had showed abnormal cells that were due to the HPV virus. And so throughout the years up until I turned 32, I had several procedures done to try to remove those cells. A lot of the time, your body will automatically just get rid of that virus, but sometimes your body does not, even with certain procedures. And so eventually, after having kids and then having another abnormal pap test, I got referred to another specialist to have a cone biopsy, and that was in December of 22. So then in January of 23, I got the results back that confirmed I had stage 1A2 cancer. And so that is what led me up to that diagnosis. So that's why I'm definitely passionate about being up to date on your wellness exams, because you might have no symptoms at all and there could still be an issue.
And your cancer was caught very early. What kind of treatment did you pursue?
Yes, it was caught very early, fortunately, since I stayed up to date on everything. So pretty much as soon as those cells basically transformed into cancer, it was caught. And after I talked with the oncologist that I was referred to, we decided that a radical hysterectomy was the next best form of treatment for me. Since I had 2 kids, and while having my fertility taken away from me was difficult to deal with, I was at peace with having my 2 girls and just moving forward with the radical hysterectomy of removing those organs. And with that, I did not have to have any chemo or radiation or any other treatment, fortunately, since it was caught so early.
What was going through your mind with that cancer diagnosis? And then, a radical hysterectomy is very serious surgery. What was that like for you mentally and emotionally?
So the day that I got the phone call, I was more wrecked than I thought I would be. Since I'd had those abnormal cells for years, I was told, like, worst case scenario with that, it would be turning into cancer, which was always in the back of my mind, but you always try to stay positive, like, no, it won't happen to me. Nobody ever thinks that cancer will happen to them. But that day, I got told those words that I had cancer. And even though I thought I prepared myself with that possibility, it definitely wrecked me that day. I was in my office, cried my eyes out. You have flashes of, even though it's caught early, you're like, well, what if it's worse than we realize? What's going to happen to my family?
Right. What if
So
I
I
don't
had
get to see my girls grow up?
Right. You have those dark thoughts initially. Luckily for me, those dark thoughts did not last for very long. I'm very fortunate that I have a wonderful support system. My husband was very supportive. My family was there for me, and then also my church family. And I have so many friends that were there for me and supportive of me from the get-go. And I feel very fortunate that I didn't have to stay in a dark place for very long. There's so many out there that have to struggle through that dark mentality for so long. And so I definitely feel fortunate.
A radical hysterectomy is the removal of the uterus, the cervix, the top part of the vagina, and some of the surrounding tissue. So again, this is serious surgery that affects your body in a lot of ways. What was recovery from that surgery like?
The recovery was a lot worse than I expected. The thing I'm assuming is it closest to is a C-section, but my surgery was an open radical hysterectomy, so it's a very large cut in the abdomen. And like you said, it removed the uterus, the cervix, the top part of the vagina, surrounding tissue to make sure it didn't transfer out of that area. Luckily, I got to keep my ovaries, so I didn't have to deal with early menopause symptoms, which is also a blessing. And I was in the hospital for longer than I thought I would be, but it made sense why I was. And then I was off work for 6 weeks. And you definitely realize how much you use your abdomen muscles when you have them cut wide open. So there was a lot of pain. There was a lot of adjustment to how to get around. One thing that I look back on is probably the biggest struggle was telling my kids they couldn't sit on my lap. They were used to snuggling with mom all of the time. And I had to just reiterate to them, you got to be gentle with mom. You've got to sit beside me. You can't sit in my lap. So that was an adjustment as well.
And they were about
recovery.
3 and 5 when you had the surgery, right?
Yes,
they were little.
They were little, for sure.
How does having this happen to you, having cancer, having this radical hysterectomy so young, how does it change how you think about yourself and your body?
It's definitely humbled myself, and I've also embraced, what my body has been through. As women, we go through a lot anyways, and to go through a cancer experience and the treatment that you go through in that, I take pride in what my body has done and who I am. And I also just use that to drive myself to use my voice for others so they don't have to go through what I went through as well.
Talking to Emily Hoffman a few minutes ago, she talked about always being the youngest person in the waiting room when she was getting chemotherapy or radiation. And you didn't go through chemo and radiation, but you were so young having this cancer. How did you connect with other cancer survivors and other people in your age group?
Yeah, so after my surgery, I started Googling cervical cancer survivors, trying to find others that had gone through, just because though doctors tell you what you could experience, there's something comforting about being able to connect with somebody who has actually gone through what you've gone through. And through Googling and searching, I stumbled upon this group called Survivor, which is a cervical cancer survivor group. It's been a wonderful organization that has helped me through a lot. And that's actually how I met Emily as well. So I'm so happy to hear her story being told as well. But Survivor's been a wonderful organization that's connected me with other survivors. Even if they've gone through different treatment, they know that the cancer journey is something to bond over, to help each other. Some people don't have that support system like I did. And so if I can get the opportunity to be that for somebody else, that's also been a blessing for me.
You talked earlier about embracing your voice and sharing your story and trying to help others get the information they need to either catch cancer early or prevent it altogether. Tell me a little bit about what you've done to try to educate others about HPV, the possibility of vaccination against HPV, which can prevent cervical cancers, and also getting those regular pap smears.
Yes, I love talking about that. I've definitely found my voice even when I'm nervous to talk in front of people, but the organization of survivors definitely helped me find my voice. I was able to attend what they call their survivor school, and that is just a great training opportunity to help be able to advocate and educate those around you, whether that's in your community, whether that's going to your legislators, whether that's going to schools, even just talking with your family about cervical cancer awareness and then the HPV vaccine as well and the education there. So some of the things that I've done with that voice is since I work at a health clinic, a provider gets to go with me to local schools, and she talks about the HPV vaccine, the education. We're very respectful of the sensitivity of vaccines, and so we understand that. But we definitely want to just provide that education so then they can make informed decisions. And then I tell my story since it came out when I was a little young to be informed on the vaccine, so I didn't get it. And because I didn't get it, that's where my cancer journey eventually landed. And so to be able to give that education to schools has been wonderful. Last year, we were able to do a cervical cancer proclamation with the Governor Reynolds, which was a wonderful opportunity to be able to go to the Capitol and do a public signing for that. And then I just continue to find ways to tell my story in different local communities.
Athena, thank you so much for telling your story today.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Athena Porter is a cervical cancer survivor. She was diagnosed when she was only 32 years old. She lives in Leon, near the southern border of Iowa, with her husband and 2 daughters. This hour, we've been talking about the increasing cancer rates among young Iowans. Talk of Iowa is a production of IPR News. Our producers are Caitlin Troutman, Samantha McIntosh, and Danny Gear. Our digital producer is Natalie Dunlap. I'm Charity Nebbe. This is Talk of Iowa.